Right, so what we're doing is in this build, we're using the fake store API to get some product data. So you can see here all products, and the way you would fetch products, you can essentially, we have access to the await keyword. So in Next.js 14 and 13, I believe, you have access to the fetch API. So all we need to do is basically fetch and then await the response and convert that response to JSON. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constant called all products. This is going to be asynchronous call, but I'm going to do it as a separate function. So we're again using single responsibility. So we're separating our concerns. We don't want to do any logic in this page. We want to essentially import the function that fetches the products itself. So all we need to do is await, and then this function we're going to be doing is get all products like so, and we just invoke that in here like that. So let's just save this, but there is an issue because here it says await expressions are only allowed with the async, and you're wondering how would we use async function. So it's quite simple. Export default async function. So now you can see this page has access to the async itself in here. So now we can do async await and then get all products like that. So now what we want to do is we want to create a place where we can have all of our API functions that handle everything in there. So all we want to do is create a new folder at the top level. So let me just quickly close everything down that we don't need. So we don't need the components, and we have only the app folder open. So in here at the top level, we want to create a new folder. You could call it lib, utils, whatever you want to call it. But this is where we will have our functions for fetching data. So our CRUD methods basically. So in our get all products, we want to have utils. So in our utils folder, we want to have a file called products.ts. So basically, this is where all of our products are going to be fetched. So actually, I need to move that into utils. And in here, we want to basically create some CRUD functions that will be able to fetch our products on the homepage. And then we also need to do one for our individual products. So that way we will pass in an ID and then fetch this certain product. So that's how you would do it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an export async function. And this function is going to be, as we saw, get all products. So actually, GitHub Copilot's helped me out here. Essentially, we are doing a response await fetch of the products in here, and then const data is await response.json, and then we are returning the data, which is fine. But what we want to do is we want to utilize Next.js's capabilities. So in our case, we want to cache our response. So in here, we have access to the fetch API. If you hover over it, it says the input, which is a string, which is fine, and then the initialization. So this is where, if we click through, actually, let's just double check what this is. So init is a request init, which is a request init. So if we keep delving deeper, you have all of these options in here, and one of them, I believe, is cache, or is an object that has the cache in, which is coming from Node, and it's not in there actually. So let me just double check where I'm getting this. So actually, here it is. So request cache in here. This is basically what we want to do with our API data. So I believe the default is force cache, which basically caches the response. So then you don't need to refetch it all the time. The response is always the same. And then these are the other ones like no cache. We don't want to basically cache. We want to fetch on each request. So each time a person enters the slash homepage, an API request is made to the fake store API. And then that way you're getting basically more hits on your API. But you want to think cleverly and think, is this data going to change? Therefore, let's just cache it because it's going to save us money on our quota. Say I have 1,000 API requests a day, then what I want to do is basically cache it because it just makes sense to, because you're saving money as well. You got to think about that side of things and not that just the fact that it works, because it could work, but how are you saving your business or your company that you work for money on that side? This is where you need to think ahead and think more technical, because that will separate you apart from a lot of people. So things like this make the difference. So what we want to do is basically go in our page. First of all, import this in because we have it working, and then click through. This is completely fine, but we want to optimize this. So the second argument is an object, and in this object, you can see here you got the method get and so on. But in here, because we're using Next.js, you can look at the docs as well. We have something called cache, like that, and you could use no cache. But what we want to do is force cache because we don't want to keep refetching all of the data. And then essentially we could do some sort of type check as well on the response. So if the res.ok, then we could throw an error like that, and then this error will navigate us to our error page, which is the client page here that we looked at before, which is going to render this something went wrong. And then again, you could pass it in error message in here that gets rendered out here to the client, which is a good idea, and I think you should do that. But for now, let's go into get all products. In here, if response is okay, throw a new error, then we got basically the data. You could basically do return response.json as well in here like that. But yeah, that's how you would basically do the get all products function. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to do the same for the get product by ID, which basically is another product. And I'll actually bring in the rest of the CRUD methods in here. But that is how you would do everything in terms of like getting a product by category, get a product by ID. Them are the only ones I've got. But this part is important, this second part, because we want to cache the information and essentially do whatever we want with it. So if we now save all, and that is all working correctly. So now all we need to do is we need to make sure we're getting all the products. So let's just console log this out before we actually render our page. So let me console log all products, and then I like to just do that at the end as well. And then we don't want to return this. Let's just return null. So basically anything after this won't execute. So let me save this. And because we're fetching server side, this is important because we're fetching server side, everything is going to show up in our terminal, not our browser, because this is a server component and we have access to all of this on the server. Therefore, everything that we see on the server is shown in our terminal and not our browser, because the browser is the client. So as you can see, we're logging everything, we're getting everything for us. So now what will happen is in our return block, we should be seeing our product grid. If it all is working correctly, the product grid should get rendered on the home page. So let me go in here in our home page and refresh. It's saying something went wrong. So we are going to our error page. We have an error, which is good. So we've seen our error page for the first time. If we go in the console, you can see here it says scroll up. There's basically invalid source prop from the fake store API on your next host image. So what's happening is because we're fetching information from fake store API, i.e. for the images, we need to configure the next image itself. So if we go command space in here and zoom in, it tells you what the error is. It says hostname fixedorapi.com is not configured under images in your next config.js. So let's go ahead and do that now. And then what we will also need to do is restart the server. So basically this is an object, and in this object we can pass in the images and so on. And actually it's telling you here, this is an example of what you could do, but this is what we need. So we just need this images section in here. So let me just go back in the browser, and we need to write fakestoreapi.com. So let me just paste that in over here, and now this should work. If you want to optimize further, you can do, but essentially I don't want to add headers and things like that. You should do, which is good for your website, but I mean, for this build we should be fine. And I believe you need to restart, or maybe it restarts it for you. Let me just see what's that done. Okay, yep, that's restarted it for me. So now you can see that the images are rendering correctly on the site. Right, so now that we have everything set, what we want to do now is focus on the branding. So we are going to create our custom theme variable that would render the colors, all of the theme stuff for our site. So what we'll do is do that next.